cursed daughter was offered to the vampire king as a sacrifice, but he crowned her his queen instead. The night was heavy over the kingdom of Valamire. Clouds, thick and dark, cloaked the pale moon, leaving the world in deep shadow. The wind whispered through the broken towers and withered trees of the cursed lands, carrying a chill that crawled into the bones of anyone who dared to walk beneath the ancient sky. In the capital, the castle's walls loomed like silent sentinels, their stones blackened by age and the sorrow of countless generations. Inside, preparations were underway, but not for a celebration. Tonight, a princess would be offered as a sacrifice, a last hope to save a kingdom that had already lost too much. Princess Alara stood at the edge of her small chamber, her hands folded tightly before her. She was 16 winters old, her hair the color of midnight, her eyes a stormy gray that seemed to see more than they should. Her heart pounded like a drum in her chest as her gaze lingered on the heavy wooden door. Beyond it, soldiers moved like shadows, and somewhere in the distance, the bells of the castle tolled mournfully. They called her fate. For years, the people of Valamire had whispered of the curse that clung to her since birth. Misfortune had followed her family like a relentless shadow. Crops failed, storms struck without mercy, and enemies seemed drawn to the kingdom as if guided by some unseen hand. The oracle had said it was the daughter herself who carried the curse, and that only offering her to the vampire king, Kael, could break it. Elara had heard the stories of Kael, told in trembling voices around hearths in the dead of night. He was not merely a king, he was a legend, a being of darkness who ruled over his immortal domain with iron and fire. Some said he had lived for 1,000 years, and in that time he had destroyed cities, crushed armies, and commanded loyalty through fear. Others whispered that he was not truly cruel, only empty, shaped by centuries of solitude and loss. Either way, the thought of meeting him brought both terror and an impossible curiosity. Her nursemaid, a woman named Mariah who had cared for her since birth, entered silently, carrying a lantern whose light trembled against the walls. "Elara," she said softly, "you must be strong. This night is not your end, though it may feel like it." "I do not feel strong," Elara whispered. Her voice was small, fragile against the enormity of what awaited her. "I feel afraid." Mariah's eyes softened. "Fear is not weakness. It is the beginning of courage. Remember, Princess, the night is dark, but the dawn is never lost." Elara nodded, though the words did little to quiet the storm in her chest. She followed the nursemaid through the castle's corridors, past guards who bowed but offered no words, down staircases that seemed to descend into the very heart of shadow. The wind outside howled like a beast, rattling the gates and shaking the torches that lined the halls. At last, they reached the outer courtyard. Beyond the walls, the forest stretched into darkness, twisted trees clawing at the sky. And there, in the distance, a castle of black stone rose like a mountain of obsidian, its towers reaching higher than the clouds. This was Kael's fortress, the place where no mortal had ever returned willingly. A carriage waited, drawn by horses as dark as night itself. Its wheels crunched over the frost-hardened ground, carrying Elara toward the unknown. Each turn of the wheel brought her closer to the man who had haunted her people's dreams for centuries. Inside the carriage, the silence was thick. Elara's hands gripped the edges of the seat as the forest passed in shadows. Mariah stayed near the door, a quiet presence, but even her calm could not dissolve the tension that hung in the air. "Elara," Mariah said softly. Remember what I told you. They may think you are weak, but weakness is a mask. You have fire in your heart, and fire can survive the darkest night. Elara closed her eyes, trying to summon the courage she had never known she possessed. Her life, her family, her kingdom, all of it depended on what would happen in the next hours. And yet, despite the fear, there was a small spark inside her, a strange defiance that whispered, I am more than what they say I am. The carriage soon reached the gates of Kale's fortress. Massive doors, carved with ancient symbols, swung open silently. The air smelled of cold stone and something older than memory itself. Soldiers in dark armor escorted her through endless corridors lit by candles that flickered like souls in torment. Finally, she reached the throne room. It was larger than anything she had ever seen. The ceiling lost in shadows, walls lined with towering statues of creatures that seemed half human, half beast. The room was empty, except for him. Kale sat upon a throne of black stone, his form regal, his presence undeniable. He wore a dark cloak that seemed to absorb the candlelight, his face pale yet sharp, eyes glowing faintly like embers. He did not rise as she entered. Instead, he regarded her with a look that felt both dangerous and curious, like a predator assessing prey that might yet surprise him. Elara's breath caught in her throat. He was beautiful, terrifying, and utterly otherworldly. The legends had not done him justice. She felt the weight of centuries pressing down on her, the cold emptiness that surrounded him. And yet, there was something more, something human, or at least something that hinted at it. Princess Elara of Valamire, Kale said, his voice smooth and low, echoing slightly in the vast hall. You come to me as an offering, yet I see in you. I am not an offering, she stammered, though her voice betrayed her fear. I am... Shh, he interrupted gently, though his gaze did not waver. Words are useless in the face of destiny. You are here because fate demanded it. And yet, you are not like the others. Elara did not understand. Others? What had he meant? But before she could ask, Kale rose from his throne. The air seemed to bend around him as he moved, shadows twisting like living things. He stepped closer, and the warmth, or was it heat, of his presence made her heart race. You will wear the crown of darkness, princess, he said, but not as I thought. You will not die tonight. You will live. With me. You will be my queen. Elara froze, unable to speak. Her mind reeled. She had expected death or something crueler. But this was impossible. Queen, she whispered. Ale nodded. Yes. Queen. Not a prisoner, not a sacrifice. A queen. The words should have brought relief, yet they felt heavier than any fear she had known. A crown meant power, yes, but also responsibility, and Kale's world was nothing like her own. The thought of living here, in the shadow of an immortal king, in a realm where night never truly ended, it was almost as terrifying as death. Hilara's pulse thundered in her ears. She searched his face for cruelty, for a hidden trap, but found none. Only a strange, inscrutable calm. And yet she sensed the weight of unspoken truths, secrets buried under centuries of solitude. Kale extended a hand toward her. "Come," he said. "The night awaits, and with it, your destiny." Ilara hesitated. The fear in her chest battled the spark of defiance that had carried her this far. Finally, she placed her trembling hand in his. The chill of his skin sent a shiver through her. But it was not unpleasant. It was awakening? As she followed him, the torchlight flickered against the walls, and she caught a glimpse of the throne room beyond. Statues of long-dead kings and queens seemed to watch her, their stone eyes judging, whispering. A shiver ran down her spine. Could she survive this? Could she survive him? The doors behind her closed with a sound that echoed like a drumbeat through the fortress. There was no turning back now. The wind outside shrieked in warning, and the shadows themselves seemed to lean closer, curious about the new queen who had walked into the heart of darkness. Kale led her to a balcony overlooking the cursed lands, where the fog rolled over twisted forests and broken towers like a living tide. "This is your kingdom now, as much as mine," he said quietly. "But remember, princess, this crown is heavier than you know. It may devour you, as it has devoured many before." Elara's breath caught. She looked down at the lands below, feeling the weight of her destiny pressing against her chest. Yet in that fear, a strange thrill stirred. Something within her whispered that perhaps she was not meant to be devoured, but to survive, and to change this world, and perhaps even the immortal king beside her. And as the night stretched on, dark and endless, the princess, once offered as a sacrifice, realized that her story had only just begun. The wind howled through the fortress, carrying secrets older than memory. And somewhere in the shadows, Kale watched her, his expression unreadable, as if weighing her very soul. Tomorrow, everything would change. And the night was only the beginning. The next morning, the fortress of Kale stirred with quiet life, though the sun never truly touched its stone walls. Light here was borrowed from flickering candles and pale lamps, casting long, trembling shadows that seemed to move like living things. Princess Elara woke in a chamber vast and silent, its walls lined with tapestries depicting battles, kings and creatures she had only heard of in whispered legends. She sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers brushing the cold sheets, and remembered the events of the night before. Kale's words echoed in her mind. "You will be my queen." "But this crown is heavier than you know." Elara did not yet understand what that meant. Was it power, danger, or the subtle weight of being bound to a being whose life stretched centuries beyond hers? Her heart still pounded with the memory of his presence, the sharp contrast of fear and fascination that had stirred within her. The door opened quietly, and a tall servant entered with a tray of food. She curtsied instinctively, unsure what manners or rules governed this place. Kale had given no instructions beyond the declaration of her title. "You need to eat," the servant said softly. "The first days here are the hardest. Your body and mind must adjust." Elara nodded, taking a small bite of the bread offered. It was bland, yet sustaining. She felt herself sinking into thoughts, trying to imagine what her life would be like now. She was a queen, yes, but in a kingdom where night reigned eternal and shadows whispered secrets she could not hear. The morning passed slowly, marked only by the distant steps of guards and the occasional sound of Cale's voice echoing through the halls. At last a summons came. G was to meet Cale in the library, a vast hall of dark wood and endless shelves, where scrolls and books older than any kingdom stood like silent witnesses. When she entered, Cale was already there, standing before a large window that looked out over the endless forest. His back was straight, regal, yet something about the way he held himself suggested a weight she could not yet name. He turned slowly, and his eyes, embers in the dim light, met hers. "Princess," he said, his voice calm but commanding, "you are awake." "Good." Elara bowed, uncertain of protocol, but aware she must show respect. "My lord," she said softly, her words trembling. "You will not call me that," Cale said. "You are not a servant." "You are a queen. We speak as equals, though perhaps your understanding of what that means will grow with time." The words struck her. Equals? How could she, mortal and young, be equal to him, an immortal who had seen centuries pass like minutes? Yet in his eyes, there was no mockery, no condescension, only something heavy, thoughtful, and perhaps lonely. Cale gestured to the shelves surrounding them. "Knowledge is power, Elara. You cannot rule or survive without understanding this world." Books of every size, scrolls tied with black ribbons, and manuscripts with covers of worn leather filled the shelves. She felt a shiver of awe and fear. The fortress, the library, Cale himself, they were all a different world, a world she was now part of. "Will you teach me?" she asked quietly, her voice almost lost in the vastness of the hall. Cale studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I will if you are willing. But know this. Learning here is not gentle. It will test you, and it will change you. I will try." And so began her lessons. Cale guided her through the history of his kingdom, the nature of the shadows, and the ancient rules that bound both mortals and immortals. He spoke of power and restraint, of strength and patience, of victories and betrayals. Every word carried weight, and every glance held a silent challenge. At first, Elara struggled. She could not understand the depth of Cale's centuries, the sharpness of his mind, or the subtle shifts of power that governed his realm. She stumbled over old languages, misread the intent of rituals, and felt herself shrinking beneath the intensity of his presence. Cale, however, did not mock her. Instead, he guided her patiently, correcting her mistakes with quiet authority. Sometimes, when she faltered, he would place a hand on her shoulder, a touch firm but not unkind. Each time a strange warmth spread through her chest, confusing her. Fear, respect, and something else, something she could not name, stirred together. Days passed and the lessons continued. Elara began to see Cale not just as a terrifying immortal, but as a man shaped by loss, solitude, and endless responsibility. She saw the faint lines of sorrow etched into his face, the moments when his guard slipped and a shadow of regret appeared in his eyes. And in those moments, she felt a connection, fragile, yet undeniable. Yet the weight of her new life pressed upon her. The other courtiers and servants watched her with suspicion. They whispered behind her back, questioning her worth, her courage, and even her sanity. She felt alone, even in the presence of Kale, who remained distant yet ever watchful. One evening, as the wind howled outside and the candles flickered against the walls, Kale brought her to the balcony. The forest below stretched endlessly, twisted and dark. Mist rose like spirits, and the shadows seemed to lean closer, curious about the new queen who walked among them. "You are learning quickly," Kale said quietly. "But knowledge is only half the battle. Power is a test of heart, not mind." "What do you mean?" He hesitated, a flicker of something human passing across his features. "Strength without compassion leads to ruin. Control without understanding leads to despair. You will need both if you wish to survive here. And if you wish to survive me—" "Survive you?" Kale did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked out over the lands, the darkness of the cursed forest stretching into eternity. "I have lived long, Princess. I have seen kingdoms rise and fall, watched mortals grow and fade. And yet, in all my years, I have never met one like you. You are different. Fragile, yes, but also fierce. You carry a light that even I cannot touch, and it terrifies me." Ellora's chest tightened. A mixture of fear, pride, and curiosity surged within her. She had expected cruelty, disdain, or indifference. But not this. Honesty, and perhaps even care? She took a hesitant step closer. "I do not understand your world, Kale. I may never understand it, but I will try. I will learn. I will not be a queen who merely sits on a throne." Kale's gaze softened, a faint shadow of a smile touching his lips. "Good. Then perhaps you will teach me as well." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. Ilara felt a strange warmth, a bond forming not from fear, but from shared understanding. And yet, the tension remained, the unspoken danger that lingered like a shadow over them. As the night deepened, a distant horn sounded. Guards rushed past, their armor clanging like thunder. Kale's eyes narrowed, sharp and alert. "Elara," he said, his voice low. "Come with me." They moved through the corridors, shadows stretching and twisting as they ran. The fortress, which had seemed eternal and unchanging, now felt alive, urgent, and dangerous. At the outer gate, a messenger awaited, pale and trembling. "Your queen," he said, bowing, "your kingdom, there are forces moving against you. Those who fear your bond with Kale, they will not wait." Hilara's heart thudded in her chest. "What do you mean?" Kyle's jaw tightened. "Your people do not yet understand. They fear the power you now share with me. They will try to take it from us, and they will not hesitate to harm you." Fear gripped her, sharper than any she had felt before. The weight of her crown, the title she had barely begun to understand, pressed down upon her. She realized that her journey had only just begun, and that survival would demand courage she did not yet know she possessed. Kale turned to her, his hand brushing hers as they stood together on the balcony overlooking the cursed lands. "Do you understand now, Elara? To be queen is not to sit safely in a castle. It is to face fear, to endure the darkness, and to walk forward even when the path is unknown." Elara nodded, swallowing her terror. "I understand." Kale's gaze held hers, intense and unwavering. "Good. Then we begin." And so began their true journey, not just of lessons in power or survival, but of hearts entwined in fear, longing, and unspoken desire. Each moment together tested their strength, their will, and the fragile trust forming between them. Elaria began to see Kale not as a monster, but as a being of great sorrow and hidden light. And Kale began to see that the princess, once offered as a sacrifice, might be the one force capable of touching the darkness he had carried for centuries. Yet the fortress was not silent. Shadows whispered of betrayal, of fear, and of forces that would not allow their union to flourish without challenge. The courtiers, the neighboring kingdoms, and the ancient magics of the land stirred in restless anticipation, waiting for a misstep, a spark, a moment of weakness. Elara did not sleep that night. She stood on the balcony, the wind tugging at her hair, watching the forest below as mist rose like pale fingers reaching for the sky. She thought of her home, of her people, and of the kingdom that had sent her here as a sacrifice. And she wondered, would they ever see her as she truly was? A queen, yes, but also a girl discovering courage in a world of shadows. Kale appeared behind her, silent as a shadow. He did not speak, merely stood, letting his presence remind her of the bond they now shared. She felt the weight of the title, the danger of the night, and the strange, unnameable connection that had begun to grow between them. "Sleep will come," he said finally, his voice soft, almost human, "but only when you are ready. For now, let the night teach you." Elara turned to him, searching his eyes. "I do not yet understand this world," she admitted, "but I will, and I will not fail you or myself." Kale's expression was unreadable, yet she sensed a flicker of hope, a shard of light within the darkness he carried. And as the night deepened, shadows shifting and twisting around the fortress, a new threat moved unseen through the lands, a force that would test not only Elara's courage, but the fragile bond forming between her and the immortal king. The journey of trust, power, and forbidden longing had begun, and nothing would be the same again. The fortress of Kale seemed quieter than usual that morning, yet an uneasy tension lingered in the air. Shadows moved with purpose along the walls, and the mist that clung to the towers seemed to coil like living things. Princess Elara woke with a sense of unease, as though the night had left whispers behind in the corners of her mind. She rose from her bed and approached the window, staring down at the forest below. The trees, gnarled and blackened, stretched into eternity, and the fog rolled over them like slow-moving waves. Somewhere deep in the forest, an owl hooted, but the sound carried an unnatural weight, as if warning of unseen dangers. Elara's heart ached with a strange mixture of fear and longing. Her lessons with Kale had begun to reveal not just the world of shadows, but the man himself, silent, thoughtful, and terrifyingly complex. She understood now that power was not only measured in strength or cruelty, but in patience, control, and the choices made when fear pressed close. Her reflection in the glass startled her. She saw herself, the girl who had been offered as a sacrifice, yet now a queen in title. But she also saw the weight of responsibility in her eyes, and something darker lurking beneath, a spark of the curse that had haunted her since birth. Cale entered silently, as he always did, his presence filling the room without sound. "You are awake," he said, his voice calm, yet carrying the subtle command of one who expected obedience. "I am," Elara replied, turning to face him. "The forest, it seems alive tonight." He studied her, his amber eyes piercing and thoughtful. "It is alive," he said. "And it watches. Just as it has watched all who come before you. But it is not the forest you should fear, Elara. It is yourself." She frowned, uncertain of his meaning. "You carry a power within you," Cale continued. "A curse, yes, but also something more. You have only glimpsed it. Control it, and it may serve you. Fail, and it will consume you, and perhaps those around you." Elara swallowed hard. "I have always felt strange. Sometimes, when I'm afraid or angry, things happen I cannot explain. I thought it was just fear." Cale nodded slowly. "Fear is part of it, but the power is older than you." "Older than your kingdom? It is linked to life, death, and all the spaces between. You must learn to understand it, or it will shape your destiny for you." To control such power seemed impossible, yet she felt a flicker of determination. She would not be a pawn of fate. She would learn, even if it meant stepping into darkness. Their lessons that day were unlike any before. Cale led her to the deepest crypt of the fortress, a place where the walls pulsed with ancient magic and shadows seemed to breathe. Candles lined the stone corridors, but their light barely reached the edges of the vast chamber. "This is where you will learn," Cale said. "The crypt is old, and the magic within it is alive. You will face it directly. Do not fear it, but do not underestimate it." Elara stepped inside, her breath catching at the cold that seemed to reach into her very soul. She felt a stirring deep within, a pull of energy she could not name. Shadows twisted along the walls, forming shapes that felt familiar, as if they remembered her from before she was born. Cale raised his hand, and a small orb of pale light appeared between his fingers. It floated gently toward Elara. Focus on it. Feel it, not as an object, but as part of yourself. The curse is not separate from you. It is your shadow, your strength, and your trial. Elara extended her hand, trembling, and touched the orb. A shiver ran through her, and visions flickered behind her eyes, flashes of fire, storms and moments of joy and sorrow she did not yet remember. The power within her surged, untamed and wild. "Control it," Cale's voice said, calm yet insistent. "Do not fight. Guide it. Accept it." Her pulse raced. She closed her eyes and reached into the chaos, feeling the energy flow like a river through her veins. Slowly, tremblingly, she began to shape it, bending it with her will, The orb steadied, glowing brighter and warmer. Elara opened her eyes, and for the first time she felt the power, not as a curse, but as part of her. Kale studied her, his expression unreadable. "You have begun," he said. "But the real test is not control, it is choice. Power without understanding is dangerous. You must choose how you will use it, and for whom." Elara nodded, her mind still reeling. She had glimpsed her own strength, but the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty. Could she trust herself? Could she trust Kale, who carried centuries of solitude and sorrow? As they left the crypt, the fortress seemed to shift around them, alive with whispers of the past. Kale's hand brushed hers briefly, a touch that sent a warmth through her chest she could not name. Their eyes met, and in that silent exchange, a bond deepened, fragile yet undeniable. The next days passed in a blur of lessons, exercises, and quiet moments of reflection. Elara learned not only to control her power, but to understand the subtle rules of Kale's world, the alliances, the dangers, the magic that threaded through the lands like invisible veins. Yet danger was never far. Rumors reached them of factions in the neighboring kingdoms who sought to exploit Elara's curse, to weaken Kale's power, and to reclaim the girl they had once offered as a sacrifice. Elara realized that her destiny was not her own, and every step forward carried consequences far beyond her understanding. One night, as the wind rattled the fortress windows, Kale led her to the tower's highest balcony. The fog rolled over the forest, pale and ghostly, and the shadows seemed to lean closer, curious about the new queen. "Elara," Kale said softly, "you are stronger than you know. But strength is not enough. You will be tested, not only by magic, but by those who fear what you are. You must learn to trust, and also to discern whom to trust. And if I fail?" Kale's gaze softened, almost imperceptibly. "Then you will learn from it. Pain is a teacher, as is fear. But you are not alone, if you choose not to be." A silence settled between them, thick and full of unspoken thoughts. Elara felt the weight of the words, and the strange, growing warmth in her chest when she looked at Kale. She could not name it, yet it pulled her closer, even as the danger around them grew. Suddenly, a loud alarm echoed through the fortress. Guards rushed past, their armor clanging, and Kale's expression darkened. "Trouble," he said, his voice sharp. "The factions I warned you of, they move sooner than expected." Elara's heart leapt. "What do we do?" Kale's eyes met hers, intense and commanding. "We protect what is ours. Follow me, and trust in what you have learned. The night will test us, but together we may endure." They moved quickly through the corridors, shadows twisting like living things around them. Outside, the forest seemed to rise in a wave of dark motion. Figures cloaked in black moved among the trees, and Elara felt the surge of her power, raw and ready. Kale raised his hand, and a shield of dark energy enveloped them. "Focus," he said. "You can shape this. Use it wisely." Elara took a deep breath and let her mind reach into the power within her. Flames of shadow and light danced along her fingertips as she shaped them, weaving a protective barrier around them both. Kale watched, guiding her silently, his presence a steadying force in the chaos. The attackers faltered at the edge of the barrier, their weapons ineffective against the strange living energy. Elara's pulse raced, her fear mingling with exhilaration. She had never felt so alive, so capable, and yet so vulnerable. Finally, the intruders retreated into the mist, vanishing like shadows in the fog. The fortress settled into silence once more, though the air was thick with tension. Cale turned to her, his eyes glowing faintly. "You have done well," he said. "But this is only the beginning. The curse within you is awakening, and with it comes both power and danger. You must learn to master it before it masters you." Elara nodded, her chest still heaving. She understood now that her journey was far from over. She had glimpsed her strength, and the bond between her and Cale had deepened under fire. Yet the path ahead promised greater trials, deeper secrets, and emotions she did not yet fully understand. That night she stood alone on the balcony, the mist rolling through the forest below. The stars were hidden, and the moon a pale ghost behind the clouds. She closed her eyes, feeling the pulse of magic within her, the lingering warmth of Cale's hand, and the uncertain pull of the destiny she had chosen, or that had chosen her. And somewhere in the fortress, Kael watched her, silent as the shadows, his expression unreadable. He had seen centuries pass, kingdoms fall, and mortals rise and fade. Yet something about this girl, the one he had been given as a sacrifice, now his queen, stirred a feeling he had thought long buried, a feeling of hope, and perhaps even love. But the night was far from over. Outside in the dark forest and beyond the fortress walls, unseen forces stirred, moving with intent. The trials ahead would test not only Elara's courage, but the fragile bond forming between her and the immortal king. And when the curse fully awakens, neither of them may remain unchanged. The power within Elara was no longer dormant. It had awakened, and with awakening came a choice: to master it or be consumed by it. The fortress of Cale was quieter than ever, yet beneath its silent stone walls, tension simmered like fire beneath ash. The attack from the neighboring factions had left the air charged, and though the intruders had fled, a sense of lingering danger clung to every corridor, every shadow. Princess Elara moved through the halls with careful steps. Her cloak brushed the floor, and her heartbeat echoed in her ears, steady yet urgent. The lessons, the challenges, the nights of shadow and whispered secrets, they had all led to this moment. Her curse, long dormant and feared, pulsed within her, not as a threat, but as a force of life she now understood. She paused at the entrance to the grand hall, the center of Cale's fortress. Candles flickered, casting tall shadows across the walls. And there, at the throne, sat Cale, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the first hints of dawn, pale and ghostly, began to bleed into the night sky. His posture was still regal, yet the subtle tension in his shoulders betrayed a weariness she had not seen before. "Elara," he said softly, without turning, "the time has come." Her steps slowed. She had known this moment would arrive, but knowing and facing it were not the same. Her power had awakened fully during the recent trials, yet now she must confront the deepest part of her curse, the part that could either protect or destroy, save or consume. "What must I do?" she asked, her voice steady, though her chest quivered with anticipation. Cale finally turned to her, his amber eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. You must choose, Ilara. Power is meaningless without purpose. You can embrace the curse fully, risk yourself to save all we hold dear, or find another path. Both paths are perilous. Both demand courage. Ilara drew in a deep breath, her mind reaching inward to the pulse of magic within her. It surged, wild and untamed, yet she felt control, a fragile thread linking her will to the force she had feared her whole life. She closed her eyes and reached into it, letting it flow through her. The walls of the fortress seemed to hum in response, as if recognizing the awakening of one who carried not only a curse, but the power to shape destiny. "Then I will not let it harm anyone," she whispered. "Not the kingdom, not you, and not myself." Leotar stepped closer, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. "And if you fail?" She met his gaze, her gray eyes steady. "Then I will rise again. That is what it means to be a queen." He studied her, and for the first time, a faint, almost imperceptible smile curved his lips. "You may teach me more than I could have imagined." The first threat appeared moments later. From the shadowed forest surrounding the fortress, enemies moved with silent intent, drawn by fear and ambition. Their plan was to take Ilara, to harness the curse they did not understand, and to shatter Kale's kingdom. Kale and Ilara moved to the balcony, overlooking the dark forest. Mist clung to the trees like pale fingers, and the distant sounds of movement reached them, soft, deliberate, but deadly. "You are ready," Kale said quietly. "Trust yourself. Trust the bond we share. The night tests all, but together we may endure." Ilara focused, letting the power within her flow outward. Shadows twisted along her arms, coalescing into protective barriers that shimmered in the pale light. Kale mirrored her movements, his centuries of experience guiding him as he wove his own energy alongside hers. Together, their power formed a force that pulsed and shimmered like living night, protecting the fortress and themselves from the unseen intruders. The attackers reached the walls, their surprise evident at the invisible shield that met them. Blades struck the barriers, sparks flying where shadow met steel. Ilara felt the energy respond to her emotions. Fear made it surge. Determination shaped it. She closed her eyes and guided it, steadying the chaotic pulse into a controlled wave that pushed the intruders back. Kale's hand brushed hers, a subtle touch that anchored her in the storm of magic. "Do not falter," he whispered. "Your strength is greater than you know." Time seemed to stretch as Ilara fought to maintain control. The curse within her, once feared and untested, now responded to her will. She felt a strange exhilaration, a mix of fear, determination, and the undeniable connection between her and Kale. Finally, with a concentrated effort, she released a controlled surge of power. The intruders fell back, defeated not by blade, but by the overwhelming force of her awakened magic. Silence returned to the forest, broken only by the wind that carried away the remnants of the threat. Ilara sank to her knees, exhausted yet triumphant. Kale knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You have done it," he said softly. "You have embraced the power, yet controlled it. That is courage, and that is wisdom. You are a queen in every sense." Her chest heaved, but her gaze remained steady. "It is not over," she said quietly. The curse, it is part of me now. And the danger is not gone. Kale nodded, his expression thoughtful. No, it never truly is. But the choice is yours. You have proven that fear will not bind you. And that is why you are not merely a queen, but my partner in all that comes. The words carried weight she could scarcely comprehend. Partner, not prisoner, not pawn, but equal. The bond between them, forged in fear, trust, and shared danger, had deepened into something neither could ignore. That night they stood on the highest balcony, overlooking the lands of Valamire. Mist rolled over the cursed forest, pale and whispering, and the distant towers of other kingdoms glimmered faintly in the dark. Kale's hand brushed hers, tentative yet deliberate. "The dawn will come," he said softly, "and with it a new chapter. The kingdom may heal, but the world is never without shadows. We will face them together." Elara looked out over the lands, feeling the pulse of her power within her, steady and alive. She thought of her people, of her family, of the sacrifices made and the dangers survived, and she felt something she had not expected: hope. Together, she echoed, her voice steady, "We will face whatever comes." The wind tugged at their cloaks, carrying whispers of long-forgotten legends, but for the first time, Elara felt she could meet them head-on. The princess who had been offered as a sacrifice was no longer the same. She was queen, warrior, and guardian of the kingdom, and she had chosen to embrace both her curse and her destiny. Kale watched her, silent yet present, and for a fleeting moment, the weight of centuries seemed to lift from him. The immortality that had once been a prison of solitude now felt like a companion, a shared journey with the girl who had stepped into the heart of darkness and emerged not broken, but stronger. Days passed, and the fortress slowly returned to its rhythm. The other courtiers, once wary, began to recognize Alara's strength and wisdom. She walked among them not as a frightened girl, but as a queen who had faced fear, embraced her power, and survived. Yet the bond with Kale remained the center of her world. Each lesson, each shared silence, each fleeting touch deepened their connection. They were partners, allies, and something more, a delicate trust that had survived fire, shadows, and the awakening of a curse. One evening, in the quiet of the library, Elara stood before a window, watching the fog curl over the forest below. Kale approached, his presence quiet but commanding, and stood beside her. "You have changed," he said softly. "Stronger, wiser, and more human than I could have imagined." Elara smiled faintly, feeling the warmth of the words. "And you?" she asked, turning to him. "Have you changed?" Kale's amber eyes met hers, steady and thoughtful. "I have learned that even immortals can grow," he admitted, "and that trust and courage are stronger than fear, even in the darkest night." Their hands brushed, then intertwined, a silent promise binding them together. In that moment, the fortress, the shadows, and the curse itself seemed to bend around them, recognizing a balance that had been forged in fire and trust. But beyond the walls of Kale's kingdom, the world still waited, full of challenges, whispers of danger, and the eternal pull of destiny. The curse, now tamed but ever present, would continue to shape their lives. Yet Elara no longer feared it. She had embraced her power, chosen her path, and found a partner in the immortal king who had once been her captor, now her equal. And so the princess who had been offered as a sacrifice became the queen who ruled with courage, wisdom, and an unbreakable bond. The curse that had haunted her from birth was no longer a chain, but a tool of protection, a symbol of her strength, and a reminder that even in darkness, light can endure. Kale and Alara stood together on the balcony one last time before the night surrendered to dawn. Mist rolled across the lands, pale and gentle, and the first rays of light, fragile and hesitant, touched the fortress towers. Kale's hand found hers, their fingers interlacing. "We have survived the night," he said softly. "But the dawn is ours to shape." Elara's heart swelled with a mixture of hope and determination. "Then we will shape it together," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. And as the light slowly crept across the kingdom of Valameyer, the darkness retreated, not vanquished, but balanced. Shadows and light coexisted, as did the immortal king and the cursed queen, bound together by trust, courage, and a love forged in the trials of heart and shadow. The kingdom would endure, the curse would be tempered, and the queen and her king would rule as partners, not in fear, but in strength, hope, and the promise of a new dawn.